Be right back.
So hot in here.
Definitely not that bad.
Jeremy, Brian might be like slightly late. He took a run, kind of got cramped up. Just now kind of hobbling in here. Alright. I didn't tell you guys that. To leave in the house and call up with him and just sweat beading on his face. You look rough.
Everyone's going to need your hotel project open, as well as hopefully within that same file you had worked on some kind of sketch or model of your hotel room, or maybe it's on a separate drawing. We'll want to have that open. Also, if you can download, well, we can always download this during class. We might download some of these plumbing fixtures.
What now? Everything? Oh, those ones. Thanks. Still working? Oh, working.
We'll get started here in about a minute.
It takes all kinds. We sell like scum.
You can see the pattern a lot better.
Yeah, that's
I think because you're just picking up on just the general details and not like all the kind of articulation. But I think that's how it'll work in the live too, like people from a distance will see this a lot more.
yeah.
Did you guys get through the window in the lab session?
Yeah, definitely.
Any problems?
I don't think so.
Seemed like that was pretty brand new stuff to a lot of people.
Yeah.
So a lot of people stopped kind of following along.
Yeah, I think the first one, I think the second one.
Okay. We'll go ahead and get started. Essentially today, at the end of last class, we'd gone over massing and some techniques of joining your mass and then putting on floor slabs, and then also assigning actual floor slabs to the mass element and being able to still manipulate that and allow the actual floor to update as required. And towards the end, kind of threw in just some quick walls and doors. I want to expand a little bit on Revit walls and working with some of the families like doors. And then also even start talking about repetitive elements that we can create into a model group and then copy over and over again throughout a project. So something that would be similar to having 50 guest rooms throughout a hotel. You'd probably have a very similar hotel floor plan layout, and we'd be repeating it over and over again without having to actually remodel it each time. We can create it into a model group, and then if you ever have to make any edits, you can edit that one group and then all 50 rooms actually change and manipulate. So we want to go over some efficiencies in that regard, and then start talking a little bit about ceilings and then even any kind of floor openings that we can get to. In addition, if you guys can, download at least the plumbing under our resources and then family downloads. Let's go ahead and download plumbing, toilet, domestic. And then we could even do the shower pan that's underneath it, as well as the shower bath faucet family. I assume you guys put a bathroom into your hotel room. So go from there. You might also notice a little bit different look on the class website. I was playing around with updating it a little bit, just the graphics. And I also got your bridge renderings on the front page. So we actually have some work associated with this class showing up now, and it's only from the part 1 section. It's actually a pretty good slideshow. All right, let's go ahead and get into Revit. So at the end of class, I quickly started a basic wall, and I'm just going to quickly review those steps again, and then all the kind of the structural components and how you would manipulate and work with walls within Revit. Right now, we've so far worked with the home, and then under wall, basically we were looking at just kind of a generic 5-inch wall that we were drawing. Any kind of questions that came up while you guys did the assignment in regards to walls and doors? Essentially what I want to talk about is when you're drawing with the walls, it's pretty self-explanatory. You're kind of drawing lines, but it's making a wall for you. To actually manipulate dimensional data within any kind of room or whatever space that you've actually made, the way Revit works is you normally place, so you'd start placing your walls and drawing a little bit, and then later on you'd come back and change your dimensional information. You'll probably notice that if I go reset my temporary dimensions real quick to the default, that whenever you click on a wall, you get this temporary dimension that shows up, and by default it's always dimensioning to the center line of the wall. And a lot of times, especially while you're designing, you're really looking at trying to figure out that, well, you want a 10-foot wide space by 11 foot or whatever the dimensions is. You're really dealing with the interior dimensions. So at the moment, trying to figure out exactly what that dimension needs to be with the center line is a little bit cumbersome. So there's a couple of tricks to working with these temporary dimensions. The first one is if you click on an element, whatever element that you click on and highlight is the element that's going to move when you change that dimension. So if I change that to 8 feet, that wall is the one that's moving up, not the one below it. In addition to that, if you want to change the position of where this temporary dimension is tagging towards, like right now it's at the center line, if you hover over this middle button, or this middle, it's kind of like a middle circle on the dimension tick, and click on it, it will cycle through the different layers of the wall. So right now, if you click, it goes to the inside, or I can click again, it goes to the outside, or again, it goes back into the middle. So if you want to actually have a room that's 8 foot wide, I could click on both of those little tabs, or those little circles, and get it so that they're both on the inside, and then I can type in my 8 foot dimension. Now the issue with that is that gets a little bit cumbersome because every time you select another wall, you end up with a center line to center line dimension again. If you click on that wall that we just moved, notice that it still remembers where you had that last temporary dimension, so that's a little bit beneficial. But as you go through a project, it gets a little old trying to cycle through all of these different buttons just to find your inside to inside dimensions, if that's what you're always going to be using. So by default, if you go under Manage, this is the tool palette that has a lot of your different settings. We've already worked with materials and some of these items like the project location. But there's another button up here called Additional Settings. And if we click on that, you have a whole nother menu of items. Your line styles, line weights, line patterns that can be created, additional fill patterns. But all the way down at the bottom, there's a section here called Temporary Dimensions. And so by default, this dialog box will pop up, and it shows you that every time you click on something for temporary dimension, it's going to the center line of the wall, and then also center lines of doors and windows. Probably more likely you want it to go to the faces of the walls, and then also to the openings of doors and windows. Because a lot of times you're wanting to place where that opening is, not necessarily do the math to figure out where that door needs to be. So once you set that up and hit OK, now every time you click on any component or any wall, your temporary dimension is going to be exactly where you need it. You don't have to go through those extra steps of cycling through those dimensions. Modify this real quick. So this is just kind of this block right here is just kind of a quick hotel room that I put together, kind of your basic hotel room that you might see. You first walk in, you got your bathroom, maybe a closet, and then a larger space where you'd end up with furniture and your bed and all that kind of stuff. I want to go over that if we have in our program, let's say 450, I think the actual area was something like 452 square feet for that room. So far we've just kind of maybe modeled the room, but you probably haven't actually added up all the square footage. So I want to go over that. And then also talk about if this is going to be a unit that's going to repeat 50 times throughout the project, how we can start to work with that a little bit more. The first thing would be, you'll notice that I've set this room up where I've got this door leading into it, and I've got walls surrounding the whole entire room except for the exterior. And the reason for that is I'm thinking that in my case, I'm going to have rooms that are butting up against basically some kind of exterior wall that's going to be all glass. And I eventually want the exterior wall to finish the shape of my room so that I have views to the outside. And so when I placed rooms within here, I don't know if you guys went through that step yet because I just told you to do the walls and the doors, but if you click on Home and then click on this icon over here called Rooms, this is basically, the idea here is that, let me delete the rooms that I actually have in here, is that we are placing spaces, and these spaces are always placed whenever you have basically any kind of enclosed space that has perimeter walls all the way around it. If I click on Room, and then I've got tag on placement shown, and I place a room, I'm going to get this really huge tag at the moment because of our scale, but I'm going to just click on that space, and then you'll notice that when I click on this other space that doesn't have a boundary all the way around it, when I place it, I get an error message saying my room isn't properly enclosed. But what that data is doing, or what this boundary is doing when we place a room, if you kind of hover over that space once you've placed it, you can eventually select, you'll get like this big X mark that's blue all the way through the room. If you click on that, you'll see to the left you have properties, and it will tell you things like the area of that space is 58.87 square feet, and the perimeter is 32 feet 8 inches, and right now there's an unbounded height of 10 foot because my walls were set to 10 feet. So by placing rooms and placing spaces, once you've actually created a space, this is how Revit can manage and start to pull and extract the data from whatever architecture, whatever spaces you're creating. So later on, just like we did like a mass floor area schedule, we could actually do a room schedule and then schedule out exactly the square footage of this particular space. Or you could actually click on all these and add them up. Now the room that I don't have an exterior wall at the moment because I'm realizing that this is going to be placed up against a massing element and eventually a curtain wall system of some kind. Anytime that you have a space that's not going to have a wall going all the way across it, this would be a case if you happen to have any kind of atrium spaces or kind of two-story spaces or whatever, and one of the edges is maybe an overlook to another floor, you'll probably come across this condition quite a bit. And in order to solve that problem and make this an enclosed space, if you look under the room, there's this little down arrow, and if I click on that, there's another item there called room separation line. A room separation line is just a simple line, and of course you can draw it in any kind of pattern that you want, whether it's curved or straight. I just am basically using that to sketch the boundary of where this room should be located. Once I do that, I now have a properly enclosed space that I can actually see that this whole entire space right here is 240, close to 244 square feet. Now later on, when you actually start to use room separation lines quite a bit, eventually you don't want to see those. So those are controlled in your visibility graphics, and it's actually a line style. So if you look under lines and expand it, there will be in parentheses or these brackets actual line type called room separation. And if you uncheck that and hit OK, that goes away, but you still maintain your actual room enclosure. Now I'm going to actually delete these tags at the moment, and I'm going to keep those rooms shown. I'm also going to place another room kind of in this little closet, and I'm going to take off the tag and not worry about it, and just place that as well.
If you wanted to have like sliding doors in there, could you just put them on solid wall now and put them in the sliding door later?
Yeah, you could, like this door could actually not be there, and you could calculate this as a room, and then later on when you find a sliding door or some kind of component that you want to put in there, you can just add that in there at any moment. So a couple other things with the doors that we're actually using. I went over also how these doors are set up where there's a certain set of parameters where you can, right now the default is for the door swing to be at 90 degrees. You can see the swing in 2D plan, and there's a swing 3D panel. I could change that to 45 if I wanted. If you start having a lot of door overlap, you can 45 your degree your door angles or swings. And the other one that has to do with the swing in the 3D section, that has to do with if you're ever looking at this in a 3D model. And let's say you were rendering this room and you wanted this door to be open so you could actually see into it. You could use the 3D panel swing, and that door would actually open in 3D. So this door is a little more advanced than what you would typically get with Revit. This is something that we typically use in our office. And you can kind of always look at editing the family and see how it's set up. But right now I'm just going to tell you that it's set up with a set of parameters that has your very basic dimensions, which have to do with the width of the door and then also the height of the door. So you'll notice in my floor plan, if I go back to, I think I was modeling all this in level 4, I've got this one door that's a lot smaller. It's a 2 foot by 7 foot door, whereas everything else is a 3.0. And of course I might eventually change the bathroom door to be something a little bit smaller later on as I start to place things. But if I notice that when you guys downloaded that actual door type, there was only 2 door types shown in there. There was a 3 foot by 7 foot and a 3 foot 6 by 7 foot. So if you want to manipulate and actually create another door type that is a little bit larger or a little bit smaller, all we really have to do is click on the door that we want to change. So I can click on this, and under Edit Type, under the Properties over here to the left, you get this dialog box that we're pretty much familiar with nowadays. It has to do with your families. You can click on this little preview button that's down on the bottom, and it kind of shows you a preview of the actual family model that's from the actual RFA file. And you have a little view cube that you can rotate it around. And in this preview, you can also zoom in and zoom out if you hover over, and you can also pan around. So you can actually kind of view your changes within this little preview window. But what you'd want to do is, since we've already got this 3 foot by 7 foot door, is we would want to duplicate it. So I'm going to duplicate it, and let's go ahead and we'll make this more like a 2 foot 8 door for now. So I'm going to change the title of this to be 2 foot 8 inches. And you'll notice that there's a little suffix of number 2 at the end. That's because it assumed that if you're duplicating it, that maybe you're still going to call it a 3 foot by 7 foot door. So Revit just automatically adds in an additional suffix to give it a unique name, but I'm going to delete that. And once I do that, really all I'm doing is changing the name of what's going to show up in this properties box over to the left. But I also have to change the properties that are associated with that change as well. So I'm going to zoom down here to where it says width, and I can change that from 3 foot to 2 foot 8 inches and hit OK. And then my door changes to that actual width. We'll go over how to set up that data, and we've already kind of done that, especially with our bridges, with all the parameters that you've been working with. It's essentially a door panel that has a width dimension with a width label and then a height label, and those parameters were set in that particular file. So because they were already set up, we can go ahead and manipulate it as much as we want. And now in our drop-down menu, under that name of the door, you have all these different dimensions, or this additional dimension type that you can choose from. Notice that the name of your family is also the name of the file that you called, or whatever you saved your family as. So as you get more into Revit and you start actually creating a lot of different families or bringing in families from other sources, you'll probably want to come up with your own naming nomenclature of exactly how you want to name that file so that you can find it in this little properties box. When you're in the properties box and you've got this pull down menu, you can zoom to, because eventually you get a lot of different families thrown in here. You could have a file with actually 200 families that you have to scroll through, and as you start modeling, you have to go and find that particular family. You can, while this is open, actually type in an S, or whatever the first word or first letter of, let me scroll down. So if right now in my actual drop down menu, I've got a bifold door, I have a door single plain panel, and then a single flush. If I scroll all the way down and I don't see my bifold door anymore, if I hit the letter B, it jumps up to show that in, it actually jumps to show that in the pull down bar. So that's also why you would want to name your particular family types in some kind of logical way, so that eventually you can have a shortcut to scroll through your properties. If you don't have a lot of different families, it's not going to matter quite so much at the moment. So now what I can do is I've got this my my hotel block, and let's say I wanted to start putting this repetitively all throughout my at least my 4th floor plan that I'm working on. Some of you might just take what we've already modeled and copy it. And let's say I copy this a couple more times. And of course I didn't select my room separation line, so actually I need to turn that back on, so I'm making sure I select it. I'm going to go back into my visibility graphics and then turn on room separation. So, eventually you probably might start going around and, copying this one after another. And I'll kind of do this maybe, let's just do it like 4 times, or 3 times. And so let's say I have a, hotel wing that's being developed in this way. Move this off to the side. And I've got 50 of these that are going to occur, not only on, throughout the level 4, but I'm going to have them on different floors as well. Anytime that I decide that later on I don't like the design of this actual floor plan, and I decide that, maybe I need to move this wall, and I'm just selecting the wall, and you can use the cursor keys to also move, components around. And I make a change here, and maybe I need to make a change over here. I'm only, because I copied this over and over again, I'm only making a one-off change to that one particular room, which maybe that's the case, we only need one room to have this change, but to be efficient, especially with the amount of rooms that you're going to have in your hotel, in your skyscraper, you're going to want the ability to make one change here and then have all of your rooms that you've placed update throughout the whole entire model. And so I'm going to Control Z and just get back to where I had. I made too many little changes here. There we go. And get back to where I just have that one room. we can make what's called model groups. And model groups work just like in SketchUp when you group a set of objects, and then you can create a group and then you edit that group and it updates everywhere every time you place that particular group. It's the same concept as blocks, making blocks in AutoCAD or blocks in Rhinoceros. If we select all of these elements that we want, including the rooms, there's this little option at the top next to there's like a filter button, and then there's a kind of a sphere with a cube, and then it looks like a little sun or something, a little explosion off to the right. This is just an icon that says create a group. And once we do that, we can click on create group. It's going to give you a dialog box so that you can name it. So I might call this room type 1.
Can you show what it was again?
Yeah. So when you select all your items, as soon as you select it, you'll get this create tool palette. And you have all these, create assemblies, create parts, and then create group. When I click on that, I'm going to call this, I'm going to have to call this room type A. I might call it room type 1 or something like that, but I've already got that named in my project already. Every time you create a group, it has to be a unique name. You can't, just like in families and all kinds of other things that you create within Revit, you always have to have a unique way of calling it. And so I'm going to type in room type A and hit OK. And then you get this dashed line around it that now when I kind of unselect, kind of left click into space, and then go back in and hover over this component, I'm actually able to one click and select all those parts together. You also notice that in your project browser, you have this section over here called groups. If you kind of minimize or scroll to the bottom of your project browser, there's families and then there's groups. If you expand it, you have detail groups and model groups. And now that we've created a model group, I actually have this expansion bar that I can then see I've got a room type A shown in here. A detail group, we'll get into those later, but that has to do with any kind of annotations. Let's say you create some drafting components or actual detail components that are just literally 2D lines that we're going to use on top of wall sections and so forth. That's when you start piling that into it automatically create that as a detail group. So model group is everything that can be 3D modeled, and details are going to be 2D things that we'll get into later. So now what I can do is I'm going to move over here to my floor plan where I've got kind of this angled wall, and I need to get rid of this. I'm going to run a model here. Why don't you go away? So I've got this group, and I can actually delete this in the view because now this acts more like a family or any kind of component that we place. I can actually click under Home, and there's another tab over here, sort of in the middle under Model, your Model toolbar or tool palette. There's an icon here called Model Group, and I can click on that down arrow, and you've got options for placing the model group and creating a group, and then you can also load other families or any other Revit project in as a group as well. So right now I can just click on place group, and this works just like the families. I've got this pull down bar in the properties section, and then I can find all my model groups, and I can choose model type A and then place it. But I don't have the controllability like when we place the door. Remember I said you would hit the space bar and it would rotate the door around and also align to certain angles that are already established. Right now basically I can't rotate it, but I can just place this actual room at the moment. Once I place it, just like I've said before, in Revit you always place things and then kind of align them or position them in the space. if I want this room to actually be angled with the outside face of my floor slab, and now that I actually have a floor plate that I've created that's actually a real model element, Revit will recognize it in this particular environment, I can click under Modify and then hit Align. And if I align this edge to another part of my model group, it will rotate around and kind of move into place. Of course, now I'm backwards. So I can just click on that and then also click on, I'll just rotate this 180 block, 180 degrees. And then I've got my element there in place. You notice that my floor slab has that stipple pattern shown in it for, like, you know, looking at concrete, has like a sand pattern. It's kind of annoying a little bit, but it does show me exactly which floor plate I'm working on, since I can actually see below to level 3. I'm going to turn off my underlay. Remember, anytime you're in a floor plan view and you've got the level 4 or whatever level you're highlighted, there's an option here where it says underlay, and typically by default it's always showing you the floor below. I can click on that and I'm going to go ahead and choose none, so I'm only looking at the actual floor that I'm modeling on. Also, I'm going to edit my floor real quick so I don't see the stipple pattern, so I can get in there a little bit better. And if I click on that edit type, this is where in your structure, that material that's concrete cast in place that we set up, or maybe we chose in an earlier part of the class, shows the cut pattern, which is your concrete, and then a surface pattern, which is showing that stipple. I can just set that to none and hit OK, and then this way my floor plans aren't going to show a lot of hatch pattern, especially when I print it out eventually.
Can you show us that one more time?
Yep, if you just click on the floor, or find the floor type in your properties dialog box, click on edit type. This works just like working in the walls. You hit edit structure, and then you're going to be clicking under the material. So the material at the top was the structure, concrete cast in place, lightweight concrete. Go into here, and then you're just changing your surface pattern to none. The surface pattern is whenever you actually see that element in elevation, that's the pattern that's going to show up, the hatch pattern that's going to show up in that view, or when you look at it in elevation. Whenever you cut a section through that floor, this is the cut pattern is the actual hatch pattern that you want to see during that, when that cuts that section.
Is it under type properties? I don't see this one.
Yeah, so once you've clicked on your floor, under structure, click on edit, and then you're under your materials, you just click in there and go ahead and change that material. You can also get to that in the same way under your manage tab. If you don't want to have to click through all those different icons, you could also just, if you knew ahead of time that particular material happened to be lightweight concrete, you could just click under your materials and then do the editing there, just kind of like we did with the renderings. Now that we've actually placed this and I've aligned it and it's kind of rotated exactly to the angle of this particular wall, I might come in here, and then now that it's a group, I can start to copy this over and over again. And I'm going to mirror this about the center line of this wall next to the bathroom, so that I have at least some bathrooms, back to back. And I've got my copy is shown on the options bar is checked. I can just flip that, and it'll give you some warning here that says, oh, by the way, you have walls overlapping. And that's because, I've modeled both sides of the room. And yes, we're going to have some overlap when we do this, but it's basically just telling you that there's an overlap, just so that if you get into using Revit to do some cost estimating, or try to figure out the exact square footage of drywall that you have, you might get double counting of your materials.
When you print it, does it double? Does it make the thickness double like AutoCAD one?
No, it just overlapped the walls. So even though they were both 5 inches, they still stay 5 inches.
So it doesn't make it darker or anything?
No. Yeah, we'll still look at it. It's still the same line weights. So I'm going to also take this other component here and I'll mirror it and copy it about that wall. And maybe I'll just do this a couple more times until I get towards the end. And I'm going to take all of these, and I realize I need to maybe move this down a little bit more. I can just use the move command, and I can move it. You can start to see that Revit has these kind of dashed lines that allow you to move it parallel or in line. So I can hover my mouse around, and you can start to see that I can actually get a dashed line through this angle of the actual wall where the door is, and I know that I'm actually moving it along that line, and then I'm snapping to kind of this endpoint. I'll get into how to deal with this situation in a moment. That pretty much at the ends you might have different conditions, whereas in the middle you're probably going to have pretty similar rooms repetitively repeating. But since these are groups, now if we ever decide that we need to make some modification to this room or start to move it, as long as we are working kind of within the boundaries of this group, because remember we've kind of set up our whole entire hotel, let's say we've placed all 50 rooms, we're assuming that the outside kind of this module that we've set up isn't going to change. But let's say we had to do some manipulation in here, you can click on any group, and once you click on it, you get these other icons at the top where you have edit, group, ungroup, and then link. Basically, ungroup would take away the grouping. It would just kind of make it all regular model elements. And if we want to edit group, we can click on that button and we get into this sketch mode again, and everything kind of yellows out this time, telling you that you're in group editing mode. You can see that I can't select anything else outside of the group. And then I can come in here, and let's say I click on this wall and decide it actually needs to be moved, let's say 1 foot in that direction. I'm going to go ahead and make my edits, and maybe now I realize I can get a larger door in here. So maybe I'll make this a 2'8" door. And you'll get warnings every now and then when your door doesn't work out because it grew by the center line and then it's overlapping this wall. Now I can just go ahead and move this into place somewhere by using my align tool and getting it out of that situation. Or I could also, I'll just kind of use the cursor keys and move it a little bit. So I've made those edits, but you notice like nothing else has changed. None of these other groups have changed yet, because you have these additional kind of close commands to close out of this editing mode. You have additional ways of adding other elements to the group or removing elements. You can attach other model groups, or we could just click on finish. And once we click on finish, it'll take a moment, but all these other groups then change to reflect the actual change that you made in that first group. And so it doesn't matter which group you select, because they're all named model group room type A, they're all the same group. Any change that we make within that group, or additions or subtractions to it, will edit all throughout. So this is the ideal situation if you're working on particular room types that are going to have, or a building type that's going to have repetitive components to it. You would probably want to start setting this up. Now, notice that in each of these rooms, in each of these spaces, we placed room elements. We've got the toilet room, the closet, and the main room. And we only placed those 3 rooms. But if we click on annotate, I'm going to go to room tag. And I'm going to now tag these rooms now that we've created these and sort of did a lot of repeats over and over again. If I click on room tab, or room tag, it wants me to save my project, so I'm going to cancel that for a second. Notice that when I hover over the rooms, I'm getting all these different numbers, because Revit is recognizing that even though they were duplicate or the same rooms within the group, it realizes that because you've copied this over and over again, they're going to be in their own individual rooms, and it already automatically gives you some numbers. Of course, we can click on that space, and once we place that tag, you can click on the tag, and we can change this to say, let's say call this, cat block. Okay, make this the bedroom part. And so use the edit group command to change the instance. Maybe it doesn't like that. At least the numbers are always different. Let's see if we can change that. So basically what it's saying is I changed the name of that room, and what that's going to do now is because that was in a group, if I place another tag, no? I thought that's what the error was telling me, was I couldn't make that edit. But the numbers are changing, and my only option is to ungroup it. Does that mean that's deleting my group? So I'll have to figure that one out. Let's delete that. Well, let's go back over the, so we've made the group and we've made those changes, but let's also talk about how to work with these walls. At the moment, when you drew your walls, you probably didn't pay attention a whole lot to the base constraints and all these different properties that are associated with the wall. I'm going to ungroup all of these just for a second. And when you look at the wall, if I click on it, each wall is going to have a base constraint, and it's going to assume the level that you're on. So level 4 is where I've been modeling is my base constraint because it wants the wall to go down to the floor. And then the top offset, right now I have mine set to go up to the next level. You probably have unconnected and something like 10 foot shown. If you have 10 foot or something that's labeled as unconnected associated with your wall, what that is saying is when you're, if I look at this in 3D, that when I draw that wall, it's unconnected, it's not connecting to anything, and my unconnected height is 10 foot. So that wall is going to be 10 foot high, and it's not really going all the way up to structure. I could say that I definitely want it to go up to the next level, so I could click on level 5, and it makes that association to the next floor. But notice it goes all the way through the floor because level 5 is the top of slab, and basically your floor slab was built from the top of floor slab down. And so kind of you've got this these two conditions where the wall is moving through an element, and we need to eventually be able to trim that. But the significance of setting up a top constraint would be if you ever went into, let's say I've got my top constraint level 5 and my base constraint level 4, and later on I decide that between level 4 and 5, if I click into an elevation, hide this, and I zoom in on my data markers, if I ever decide to change the floor-to-floor height of level 5, let's say I change this to go up, let me just move it. Move it up a foot. And when I moved it up, the floor slab moved up. And then when I look at my 3D view, my walls also moved up with it. So that's why you would want your walls to, if they're actually going to go from floor to floor and make attachments to something that could possibly change later on, if I Control Z that to undo it, you see how that floor goes back down, and then also the walls go down as well. So if you know this is always going to go up to structure, you probably want to make that top constraint happen just in case later on you decide you have to change your floor-to-floor heights. But to solve the situation where the floor or this wall is going through that floor slab, anytime you select a wall, you get these options at the top that say attach top or base or detach top and base. Basically what that's saying is if you click on this and click on attach top base, I can then click on a horizontal surface, whether it was a roof, a floor slab, or a ceiling, and I could click on that and then it trims that wall down. and attaches it to the bottom of that floor slab. The significance of that is if this floor slab were to ever change, let's say you decide later on, the structural engineer comes back and says, you know what, really this has to be 4 inches of concrete on a 2-inch metal deck instead, and your floor slab is going to get thicker. When that bottom line drops, because your thickness changed, so will all of your walls that were attached to the underside of that structure. So I'm going to go back into,
So you just click on detach top base and then click on the slab?
you want to attach. So when you click on the wall, if I'm in an edit group, let me click on this. And I can click on the wall, you want to use attach, and then you select, the next option will be to select the actual base. Detach would be if later on you decided, obviously you want that wall to go back down to being 10 foot or some other dimension, you would just click on the wall and then detach, and that would remove that connection. So I'm going to back into level 4, looking at my floor plan. And one thing to kind of further go along with the groups is that later on, when you get towards the perimeter of some of your conditions, you know, if you don't have any kind of straight walls or you have a lot of angled or curved walls at the end, you may have to modify exactly what's happening to this corner unit. So now that got ungrouped. So if you know that this corner unit is always going to be changing probably as you go from floor to floor, because I know that this particular wall is angling as it goes up, or this one is angling out or angling in. You know, this space is always going to change. I can just click on this group and go ahead and ungroup it, and I can make an option here to delete that wall. And you notice my room is no longer enclosed because I don't have that wall anymore. And then I might decide that maybe this wall needs to be perpendicular to this exterior wall on this other face. This is where the align command still comes in. I told you we kind of use this align command a lot. If you click on that, I'm going to click on this aligned wall, and then this portion of my wall to make it connect, and watch what happens. It aligned my wall to be exactly angled with whatever angle this turns out to be. So you can make these kind of modifications as needed. But the other part is, again, I don't have a properly enclosed room. I have my room separation line that's still left over. I have to go ahead and go back under room and room separation line and go ahead and close off this section. Now we don't necessarily have to do that at the moment, because later on we're going to probably have an exterior wall, I would hope, on our model. And once we add in that exterior wall, that will give us a properly enclosed room. But if we're trying at the moment to just worry about the interior, we may need to draw those room separation lines so that eventually we can schedule these rooms and see where we fall in our program area.
If your walls don't go straight up, is there a way to trim them out? If the angle of the building is going in and the walls are going?
Yeah, we'll have to, so basically with the group, there is a way to do that. In any moment, let me just model a wall off to the side. If we were to model a wall, and right now, you know, your wall is just a big rectangle. If I look at it and go into 3D, if I click on this wall, you know, that's your typical extrusion. At any moment, you can, while you're in a 3D mode, or if you look at this wall in elevation, so if you look at either east or whatever, I guess we need probably a west elevation to look at that wall. Whenever you click on the wall, you also have these other options. So you've got attach, top and base, detach, and then you also have edit profile. You click on edit profile, it gives you a purple sketch. You go into the sketch mode, just like with the floors and the ceilings and also roofs that we briefly went over the floors in last class. I can draw in 3D, or I could go into the elevation, and let's say I've got an angle, and again, this has to be a closed shape. I can't have a miscellaneous line floating out there. I can exit out by clicking on, after I've made that edit, click on the green checkbox to accept the change, and you now have an angle that's associated with that. So hopefully your angle might be consistent, going from floor to floor, and you could probably calculate what that needed to be, or cut a section, and then get the right angle that you need at that location. Of course, if you have repetitive groups, you might actually kind of bring your walls back. So if I was in level 4, if I knew that this wall was changing, and later on it's going to be out here to 3 feet out, my rooms might actually start to move out, kind of with the angle of the wall. I might not have perfectly stacked bathrooms, but you don't always have to have perfectly stacked things. You might have the same group kind of move out with it, but you might also always stop this. You could stack these rooms all the way up, and then later on just come in and model an additional extension that has to do with, it might be kind of part of the exterior wall assembly. So let's see, a couple more things with walls. I'm gonna delete that guy. And if after you've made all these edits to the edit profile, if you don't want the slant or all those edits that you've actually made, you can reset the profile and it'll go back to its original form. Okay, so the only problem is if I'm going around and every time I get to the angle or this end piece, I'm ungrouping this particular block, and I'm ungrouping it to modify exactly, make it relate to this exterior condition. One thing that might not be changing from room to room, it doesn't matter if it's a corner condition or even a single condition in the middle, intermediate condition, that bathroom is probably not going to morph and change with the exterior. That's probably going to stay consistent as well. So because I modeled all this as one group, now if I make a change to the original group, and let's say I start manipulating, exactly how that bathroom space is shown, this one that I ungrouped is not going to edit anymore. And so that would mean if I have 110 floors, I have to go back into all my floor plans and make that same change to this bathroom unit again. So really what I want to do is I'm going to, probably before I venture too far on with my model, is delete all of those. I'm going to actually start over with, I'll place a group, model group. I'm going to place my room type A off to the side. And this time I'm just going to click on ungroup. And before I do anything else, I might come in here, and you'll notice that I'm able to select this other wall that's associated with the side. You might have a condition that's more like a continuous wall. And if I try to select all those components, I'm not able to select this wall because it moves all the way through to the exterior of my room. I can split walls, so if we click on the wall, under Modify, there's this tool palette called, this tool command called Split Element. Shortcut is also SL, but I can use Split Element, and it gives you this little knife, kind of like you'd see when you're working in Photoshop, and I can hover over the part of the wall I want to split. It doesn't matter where I do it. I can go ahead and split it. And then I can use my trim and extend and make it so that I have this one wall associated with that bathroom, and then trim and extend. And I have two separate walls that are being divided about that middle that intersection between the other wall that's perpendicular to it. So now I'm going to actually select this bathroom, and I can create this as a group, and maybe I'll call this okay, I hate that they put the control key where the caps lock should be. Okay. bathroom type A. And then once I make that group, within the same group, I might select everything now, and then create another group called, and this time I would use my room type A, but I've already called it room type A, so I'd either have to delete it from our project browser, and so that I could also call this room type A, or for now I'm just gonna, give it a unique name, call it A1. And so real quick, if I come back over to where I was modeling, now that I have that association set up, I can quickly come through here and then create my repetitive units again. And now when I get to this end unit, I know that I have to ungroup it to get rid of that wall. Or the other thing would be I could model this group so that I never have a wall right there, because I always know I'm going to end up with another wall on the other side based on this other group. Actually, no, you wouldn't. You do need that wall, so never mind. So now when I ungroup it and I delete this wall, I took away the group. Hey, hold on a second. Because I placed room type A and not my room type A1. Sorry about that. Got to pay attention. So this is the one that should work. Now when I ungroup it and I select that wall and delete it, I still have this bathroom as a group. So if I come into here and edit the group and finish it, all of my bathroom types are going to edit within the groups. So you kind of have to think about what's going to be maybe the variable, what's going to be changing from floor to floor as you're setting this up, so that you have some intelligence kind of built into your group, so that later on as you start to make changes and start to add in components, you can go ahead and make those additions and not have to model and go to 110 different floors to make all those different changes, or however many levels you have. Next thing I want to do is just talk about families in general. You've downloaded, if you haven't, go to the class website, and under family downloads, let's just go ahead and place something kind of typical like a plumbing, toilet, domestic family. So if you can download that. Basically, that's just a fancy way of saying it's a floor-mounted toilet. You have wall-hung and floor-mounted. Typically, you'd have floor-mounted in a residential or hotel type of situation. And I can come into my model group, go ahead and edit this, and I'm going to add in, actually need to go further. Further into my grouping. And I just need to be able to place a toilet into this location. And when I click on home, any kind of component that I want to place that's not a door and not a window, you notice doors and windows have their own tool palette. Under component in the down arrow, you have place components. And by default, you have all of these items in Revit that you don't need at the early stages of your design phase. It's really nice and convenient. You have a desk, a parking space, and trees that you can place. So I don't know about you, but those would probably be things that would come later on, or if I was working as a civil engineer, I'd be using parking spaces. But for some reason, these are the defaults. And what we need to do is be able to load in a particular family that we can start to use. And Revit's not going to have all the family types that we need, but if you click on Load Family, you should have this little icon up here in the middle. Click on Load Family, it's going to default to, or it should default to the location of the U.S. Imperial families. And these are basically families that come with Revit. When you install Revit, it's on your C drive. If you click on this kind of pull down menu here, you'll see that it's actually under C drive, program data, Autodesk, RAC 2012, libraries, US Imperial is the default location. So if you can ever find, if for some reason another dialog box pops up, you have to hunt for all that. Or you could, look over to the left, there's an Imperial Library folder that you could click on and it would take you right there by default. Now these are all the families that come with Revit, and you can see there's a section here called plumbing fixtures. I can left click in it, and I can click on one of these. I'll just click on the one at the top, and you'll see your preview window off to the right, and I can click on the down arrow and kind of cycle through what all these different plumbing fixtures look like. And you can actually see that there's already the same toilet fixture that we're about to place is already comes with Revit. But what I want to show you is that eventually you may have different family types, much like the door that we placed last time, that we need to be able to load in, and also be able to know where to find additional family types. If a family did not come with Revit, it doesn't mean you have to go out and create your own. There's already been a whole bunch of people that have created their own components and are sharing them with everybody on the internet, as well as nowadays manufacturers, and this is where BIM and Revit is starting to come in handy, is that all manufacturers are now pretty much taking their products and putting them in Revit as a family component that you can download and then place into your model. So if you're working on, let's say, a residential house, and I know I'm going to be using Anderson Windows, I could go to their website, Anderson Windows, and they'll have a section for architects, and then they'll have a section where you can download Revit families, and then you can actually be placing the exact family model that has the same parameters that are associated with that manufacturer into your model. And so you don't always have to model your own components. You could just go ahead and try to find and do some research and start placing things that you would actually be modeling or buying for the project. Plumbing fixture is a good example. You go to Colair website and you can download their whole entire library. So there's all these possibilities. The other place to look is that if you click on, I kind of exited out of all that, if you click on Insert up here at the top, there's what's called Autodesk Seek. That's here in the middle. Autodesk Seek is, you have to be hooked up to the internet, but it's basically a search engine. So I could type in, let's just say toilet, and hit enter. It'll take you to the Autodesk Seek website and show you all the families that you could download and place into your file. Now, of course, they show you sometimes images of the real thing, so you don't necessarily know how the model looks, but you can download. You'll see off to the right there's 3D Studio Max RFA files, which is the Revit family file type. There's DWGs, and there'll be different. There might be there could be other like Rhino files later on or something. But so basically what you can do is, just click on this particular family, left click on it, and then download, say download to selected local. And I think there's so you can just download the file, and then you'd be putting it somewhere on your hard drive and placing it. Now there are other websites out there like Revit City that's on my website, but I'll caution you that there's there's like the AUGI forum, which is an Autodesk forum where people like share, people actually have a forum where they say, hey, I'm looking for a Butler building steel component. Does anyone have one? And people are sharing files that way. The problem with that, and also Revit City, is sometimes you get a lot of really good models, and then a lot of times you get people who've cheated and they've just created a 3D model in Rhino or some other file and they place it into Revit, and then there's no parametric data to it. So if I download a door from somebody, like a garage door, for example, I might only be able to place it exactly how they modeled it, or I'd have to either go through the trouble of modeling it again or placing my own parameters. Autodesk Seek has a set of standards that and requirements of what these models need to have within them before they can be uploaded. Or somebody will submit them and they're not going to post them until they've kind of reviewed the model and said it's worthy, basically, of being on the Autodesk website and then being used in Revit. So this is a good location. You're not going to find everything because there's a lot of limits to, a lot of people haven't shared a lot. So you might find a lot on Revit City, but just be warned that you might find a lot of bad products as well. But since we've already downloaded the one from the class website, let's just go ahead and load the family. And we've done this numerous times in other projects. So we can just find out where we downloaded it to. And I've got it under here. Now I've got my plumbing, toilet, domestic, and I'll hit open. And that will load it directly into the project. And now I have to come back to home and then place component. And you'll get some kind of message, especially for plumbing components, that will talk about a tag not being loaded. I don't care about that right now. But when I hover over, you notice I've got all these angled walls. I can click on the space bar and it automatically aligns it to whatever angle your wall is set to before you place it. So maybe I want my toilet to be on this location, and I can go ahead and click, and then I've got my 3D toilet shown, and it's in that particular model group. And then when I finish my group, I now have toilets added to all of my different bathrooms. So even though we've kind of started off with modeling the spaces, essentially as you start to place in real components, you might decide that you have to start tweaking your bathroom walls. Really the location that I just placed this toilet would probably be where the shower unit would be, behind the closet or whatever. And I might decide that later on I only need a 5-foot shower, so when I place that component in there, I'll be making that adjustment to that wall. And that's another reason to have all these groups set up. I'm going to go into more of the makeup of the wall. I have already said that, a lot of people say you have to know exactly what your wall's made out of before you can actually start modeling in Revit. And I've just shown you that, well, you really don't. You just kind of need a generic, let's say a 5-inch thick wall, or at least know some dimension of exactly how thick that wall is going to be. But I could also, once I place all my generic walls, as my project develops, I could get a lot more specific about exactly what those walls are going to look like. And for now, I'm going to just model off to the side and not worry about my group. I'll draw this. I've got this generic 5-inch wall. Draw it off here. And now right now I'm in a coarse view. I can go into medium view and a fine view. And you notice that nothing changes, nothing happens with this wall type. That's because there's nothing but a 5-inch space that's generating the lines or thickness of this wall. Let's say I later on discover that, or find out, because I've been modeling for some time and I've started to get into more design development, and I know exactly what this wall type is going to be made out of, and I want that to start to be representative in my model. I might say that this wall type now is going to have a layer of chipboard on either side with a 3 5/8 inch metal stud in the middle, which is kind of a typical interior wall that you'd come across. And when I click on my wall types, I don't really have that in here, and I actually do. It's right here called interior 4 7/8 inch partition. But we're going to make our own just so you know the process. Let's say later on, actually this is going to be the wall in between the room, so I actually want an extra layer of drywall on either side so that I have a more soundproof room, so I don't hear the neighbors. I'm going to click on this wall type and hit edit type, and before I make changes to this, because right now generic 5-inch is what I've placed everywhere, I actually want to duplicate this, and I might actually call this something more like 0000 double underscore, and then maybe I'll call this a 4 7/8 inch GWB wall. Now the reason I put 0000 in the front, if I exit out of that, is in the properties bar, Revit does everything numerically, sets everything up numerically, orders everything numerically and alphabetically. So as you develop a project, you could have a very long running list of components here, or you might inherit a project from another architect and you're continuing to work on their model through construction documents. You might have thousands of components over here to the left, and I basically want to start putting all of my things that I'm adding at the top of the list. And so that's why I just kind of made that a 000, so it's at the top. You might come up with your own way of naming things, but that's a good method to order things. Now that I have that wall type, again, I'm back in my edit type, and now I can go under the structure of the wall. There's a button here called edit. And right now, because we were using that generic 5-inch wall, it just had a structure and it said 5 inches, and there's no material set to it. You'll see that there's these two gray bars. There's a core boundary, and then at the top there's exterior side and interior side. Depending on what type of wall you're creating, you might start to build, from your structure. Your structure is always the core of the wall, so it's going to be whatever metal studs, or if you're using CMU, or whatever is actually kind of holding up the wall. And then any kind of substrates that you start to apply to the this wall type will either grow towards the interior or grow towards the exterior. So if I was making an exterior wall, you might end up having your sheathing, then your airspace, and then your brick. Then on the interior side, you might just have drywall or a couple layers of drywall. So to set that up, I'm going to just make a wall that has, let's say we'll have 2 layers of drywall on one side and 1 layer on the other. That gives us a pretty good sound wall that we've done our research on. I'm going to first, under structure and then material, click under that button, and I'm going to assign that structural layer and scroll down to where I can find metal stud layer. Click on metal stud layer and hit OK. And then I need to change the thickness of that metal stud layer. I know that I'm going to be using 3 5/8 inch metal studs, so I can come in here and type in 3 5/8 inch. And you'll notice your preview changes as you do that. Then I want to start inserting layers growing to the exterior and the interior. So there's an insert button, click on insert. And it's just going to add another row that when you click on that number that's associated with associated with the row, it highlights the whole entire row, and then I get these additional buttons off to the right where I can move it up out of the core boundary to the exterior side, or I can move this down. And you'll also see that under this core boundary, these different layer names, or the function of the layers, have these numbers and brackets, 1 through 5, and they start to be named structure, substrate, thermal air layer, finish 1, finish 2, and then a membrane layer. Those numbers reflect the order in which your functions have to move from the center of the core. What that means is if I have structure and later on I have a substrate, if I add in another row after substrate and call it structure, it's going to be out of order and it won't allow me to put that information, it won't allow me to create that wall. So I'd have to make sure that I'm either calling the next layer substrate or another layer that has another number further out from that number 1. So right now I'll just call this substrate, and I'll click under that material, and I'm going to scroll down until I find gypsum wallboard and hit OK. And I know that my gypsum wallboard is going to be 5/8 of an inch. And I'll go ahead and insert another layer. You can see that 5/8 inch gypboard gets added to my preview. I'll call these both substrate layers for now. And we're just going to add more gypboard and another 5/8 inch. And I'll add another layer, but this time move it up to the exterior side. So basically I'm having my core boundary and then I've got 2 layers on the interior and 1 layer on the exterior. Really doesn't matter. The wall could be flipped. Go back and find gypsum wallboard again. 5/8 inch. And when I'm done typing in all that information, up at the top you can see that it's calculating the total thickness of this wall. So even though we started with a generic 5-inch wall, and the reason we used 5-inch originally was when you just had 1 layer on either side, your wall is going to be 4 7/8, so it's pretty close to 5 inches. But now our total thickness of this wall is 5.5 inches. So it'll add up whatever dimensions you started to type in this location. And I'm going to zoom out here, hit OK, and exit out. And now when I look at my wall type, you can see that I see all the different layers of the wall. And if you don't, it's because you're probably in a coarse view. Save the project. When you're in a coarse view, it's just going to show you the outside boundaries of the wall. And then when you're in a medium or a fine view, you'll start to see all the layers of that wall for your floor plan. Now, because I modeled this all with generic walls, I might want to change, let's say all these walls, we're going to get this wall type. If I click into my group and select, I can right click on a wall and you can select all instances in entire project. And it's not liking maybe because I'm in a group. So for some reason it doesn't like that option if it's in a group. If it wasn't in a group, if I just ungroup this, and I right click on that wall and select all instances in the entire project, I now get, there we go, we just needed one wall that was outside the group for some reason. I can now select all of my wall types that were labeled the generic 5 inches, and then I can choose from my down arrow in the properties and modify it to the new wall type. Still doesn't like.
I selected a separate wall, like not in that group, but two.
Okay.
I selected still within that group.
So then you can see that now all of my walls have changed, and that same wall type has updated to show you the exact 5.5 inches wall that's being located here. That's significant because later on, as you move through a project, someone might come back through and say that this wall in between the rooms actually has to be a 6-inch stud wall, and then you could just change that wall type, and then your model changes as well and is reflected in the floor plan as well as the overall thickness. We're almost done here. I just want to point out that when you're in construction documents, you want to see all these different layers in your floor plan because you want to be able to identify and look at all of the different layers that I could draw to or snap to with my dimension string. And then when you actually start dimensioning walls, you're going to snap to the face of stud and not the face of gypboard, depending on your office standards. And having all those different layers in there give you that ability to select and tab over so that you can make that dimension work out. But while you're working on that, someone might come to you and say, well, you know what, we really need a presentation floor plan. Or you're in studio and your studio professor says, I don't want to see all those layers of the wall. Why don't you just shade it in black and give me a presentation floor plan that's actually nice to look at. when you create a wall type, if you're in the edit type mode, notice that there's this section here called graphics, and it has a coarse scale fill pattern. And right now there's nothing there, but there's a coarse scale fill color and it's set to black. If I click into that space, I get an option here where I can scroll down and create a solid fill and hit OK. There we go. And now when I move from coarse view or fine view to coarse view, my wall is now shaded in. And if I look at all of my wall types, because I've placed them, I automatically have a presentation floor plan that I can present in Studio and print out. In AutoCAD, you'd have to go back through and draw a hatch and trace all your walls and do a solid fill. As long as you're setting up all your different wall types, depending on all your wall types that you have, if you just make sure you have that set up, at any moment you can change your view and look at the different details of your wall. It's really all I can go over today at the moment. For Thursday, everyone's got like reviews going on this week, right? Or something? Nice. I'll make it easy. You guys should have developed your at least some kind of idea of what your floor plan for your typical hotel room might look like. You might start to group it and test it out in your particular floor slabs. So you might just go into like a level 4 or level 5 or whatever level, kind of shows your typical shape, and start to test out how your rooms are going to lay out, and just kind of see if you've actually come up with a good module. You might decide that, let's say that this block down at the very bottom is going to be repetitive from floor to floor, and this outside wall doesn't really change. You might try to see how many rooms you can get there, and you might decide that perhaps you need to make your rooms just a little bit bigger or a little bit smaller, so that you have a really good module that works out, that you can repeat over and over again and test it out in just one little section of your floor plan. And so you're basically taking what you've already done, grouping it, and maybe testing it out along your floor plate, and you can just start to develop a little bit more of, maybe adding in some components to your bathroom, for instance, just to test out also that you don't have a bathroom that's too large or too small, just by starting to place real-world objects. Okay, easy enough? And we'll continue on with Revit modeling tools throughout the rest of the semester, of course. Any questions so far?
If I have a twisting tower thing.
Can't do it. No.
Okay.
No. So if you have a twisting tower.
Yeah.
So basically what
Like open right now.
yeah, so well, what's happening though is your floor plate is going to be twisting, and so the next floor plate up is twisting. This might be an end condition, so this room will eventually maybe be conditioned. Remember at the corner, I deleted out that one section, but I kept the bathroom floor unchanged. This wall will eventually become part of your exterior wall, and so this wall, in that group, you might have it just right that wall.
Right where the power thing goes in, right behind it.